Hello, today we are talking with Melissa Puhala. She's going to tell us what supply chain resilience is and why so many people are seeking it out. I should mention that Melissa is the Director of Supply Chain Compliance for Fastenal. Melissa, thanks for talking today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, let's start with the problems. What are people seeing out there in the supply chain today?
It has been a crazy couple years, I have to tell you. So I've been in the compliance realm for probably 15 of my 18 years here at Fastenal, and it has just taken everything to another level in the last couple years. So as of right now, beyond supply chain difficulties and delays that are affecting everybody around the globe, it's down to the basics. It's down to the supply and demand of things and the impact it's had. And I feel for the first time, the supply chain has come into the forefront of the business because they've had to understand how important it is.
So I guess I have an idea of what your answer is going to be to this, but I want to hear it from an expert. What can be done about this? What can people do to take action these days?
I think if we go back to the basics, is you have to have a plan. And I think the biggest thing I saw where people were successful is when they were open to having an ABC method of how do we make sure we don't run into that again. And one of the biggest examples I give is PPE during the pandemic is something as simple as a disposable glove or a mask, and everyone needed it. Where do I get it? And the risk that came into play when they were out. And if you have a safety plan to only spec in a certain product, what happens when that's out? Did you plan for a B or C? And that really was the game changer when companies were open to that discussion, and being a strategic partner, it really helped us step up to the plate and deliver solutions for our customers. But that was the biggest thing is you had to understand, you had to have conversations, you needed full transparency with regards to your key suppliers. So to me, with that plan, you're successful, and otherwise you plan to fail.
I hear you. Okay, that makes sense to me. I'm sitting here thinking to myself that in the past we used to hear that the shortest supply chain wins, and now it feels like it's shifting to the strongest supply chain wins, and I don't know the difference. Can you tell me what you think?
Absolutely. And I think it has evolved because you used to think that shortest supply chain. But what I think now is it's really enforced the need for global sourcing and making sure that you're able to shift, you're able to pivot in those times of strain with the supply chain, whether it's high duties that are forcing it or availability and delays that you can't control. I've even watched it from just natural disasters. You have to be able to pivot, and having those multiple sources that continue the same level of service and quality to the end users, it allows us to plan accordingly and not have such disruption. So data has helped us get through everything, and it's great to see that becoming in the forefront of the business as well.
I think, yet again, 3 years ago, nobody cared about the data that their supply chain could give them. Not nobody, but it feels like it's got such a higher point of importance these days. And is that one of the keys to building a strong supply chain? What are we looking for? What are the indicators of strength in a resilient supply chain?
Yeah, I think it's all about the visibility. You can get a ton of data, but if you're not consuming it or using it correctly, it's a waste of time and energy. And I've seen that a lot too. And I'm really big on making it very simple. You have to identify your critical use parts that your business depends on. And it may not be products. You could be really dependent on a service provider that would shut a line down or production down, or safety would be of issues. So during this time, I've really spoke with customers to help understand what is critical for your business, and let's plan for that. And then you just plan accordingly within the supply chain from there. And I think it's really big to showcase that transparency within the supply chain, but also being very open to suggesting alternatives. And that's all about the partnership there as well.
Now, this isn't a new idea. People have always wanted a strong supply chain. Nobody's like, hey, could I get a weak one? So what has changed? Was it the pandemic, or what's really driving the need for the resiliency?
I feel that the pandemic forced us towards that reality check. And something that happened before the pandemic was another thing I got to witness in my career was the tariffs, the 301 tariffs, and just where people really had to shift if products were made in a certain country and the impact that had to the overall supply chain. Um, Watching that type of stuff happen really brought things to a screeching halt where customers had to think about the critical items that were in there and how strong is that supply chain tied to it. So that is a huge expectation for our customers. We have to be able to go and look at the consumption for the last year and really identify, is there risk and what are we doing about it if there is. One of the other things that came up during this time, during the pandemic, was what does risk actually mean? Is it out and I could be shut down, or is it there's supply chain and social compliance issues such as forced labor because of supply and demand and shift in other countries? All of that has happened in the pandemic, and I feel like it took general practices to another level. And not just checking a box. It's proved to me that you can follow through on this and make sure that we are strong with you in the time of any disaster in the future.
I absolutely love your thought there of what does risk actually mean. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like we just don't dive into that enough because it's too easy to say, well, risk is not having something. Risk is it doesn't show up. Something simple like that. But there are so many layers to risk that we probably don't think about as much as we should.
And the other thing is, I think there's opportunity in risk. I look at risk and mandates. I'm a geek from the compliance side, but I've always said that mandates are opportunities. And what I've always meant by that is if I understand a special interest or a social compliance area of business, whether it's sustainability or ESG related, as an example, also came out, a lot in the last 5 years. If I understand that and bring solutions to our customers, it only gets us closer and stronger as a partner to them in their supply chain and their initiatives. So I really just have to apply it to our business and deliver solutions from there.
How do you do that how does Fastenal do that when they're trying to have a stronger supply chain? Can people just come to you and say, hey, I'd like to have a stronger supply chain?
Absolutely. I think that's the main question starting not only at contract renegotiation time, I think that's how they're comparing suppliers now today is what is your resiliency capability and how are you going to react in time of a disaster, whether that's a natural disaster and or something like the pandemic again. They want that proof. They want to understand what that means for them.
Well, Melissa, I have taken more than enough of your time. Thank you for talking.
Thanks for having me.